And we are back for the second part of our meeting. We're doing this on human trafficking and pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Tuesday. Interpretation?
Non.
Oui.
À peu près. Non.
Oui,
Désolée.
okay. Is there interpretation now? Fantastic. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Tuesday, February 1st, the committee will resume its study on human trafficking of women and girls and gender diverse people. I would like to make a few comments reminding everybody that this is a very difficult subject. So just for anyone, if you're triggered, let us know. For those who are on Zoom, make sure that you press your choice of English, French, or floor, whatever works for you, and make sure that you mute yourself while you're not speaking. So I would like to welcome everybody. All the connection tests have been done, and I know we need to get right to work. So I'd like to welcome our witnesses for this panel. In the room, we have from the Action Coalition on Human Trafficking Alberta Association, we have Kate Price, the Executive Director. From the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform, we have Angela Wu, who's the Executive Director from SWAN Vancouver. From the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, Roselle Kim, who is the Senior Staff Lawyer. And from the Yukon Status of Women Council, we have Jessica Stone, who is the Project Manager. We're going to be providing you each 5 minutes to speak, and we're going to be starting with Kate Price. When you see me start wrapping up my hand, yes, go ahead. One moment. Adrienne? Point of order?
Désolée, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, I'm sorry. Point of order, yes. Just to make sure that the Women with Disabilities group is the one that did not fail the tests. That's right?
Disabilities group did fail the test, unfortunately. The Disabled Women's Network of Canada, they have sent in a brief, but they tried the headset and we were not working out very well today. So go ahead. Anita, question?
Yes, I wonder if there's a chance to reschedule them maybe for Thursday or another day, because this is a gap that we have, that we haven't heard from any women's disability groups on this issue.
They are working on that. We're already offering some things, and we're looking at spaces already. That's absolutely an issue. But we're going to be turning the floor over right now to Kate Price. When you see me start wrapping it up, if you could take about 10 to 15 seconds left, and you'll be done. So, Kate, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Is my audio okay for everyone? Yeah, excellent. All right, well, good morning, Madam Chair and honorable committee members. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to contribute today and to speak about the issue of human trafficking in Canada. My name is Kate Price, and I'm the Executive Director of ACT Alberta, which stands for the Action Coalition on Human Trafficking. In the spirit of reconciliation, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional lands of diverse Indigenous people on which we meet today. ACT Alberta is a non-governmental, non-profit charity that operates province-wide. We run a community-based victim services unit using a harm reduction model that provides specialized case management to victims and survivors of both labor and sex trafficking. We offer free anti-trafficking education to the public, as well as tailored training programs for industries such as law enforcement, healthcare, and transportation. We use a coalition model to strengthen referral networks, cross-agency partnerships, and research initiatives to help build our community's capacity to combat human trafficking. Today, I would like to raise 3 points for your consideration to highlight critical nuances of supporting survivors. My first point is that sensationalizing human trafficking is harming victims. Sensationalizing can form an unconscious bias, a harmful stereotype, or perpetuate the idea of a perfect victim. According to a report by the Canadian Women's Foundation, 62% of trafficking victims in Canada were trafficked by an intimate partner or someone they know well. If we are looking for shackles, bars on windows, or human smuggling, we may miss the human rights violations that are occurring right in front of us. Sensationalizing this crime may make the victim or survivor feel that their experience is not traumatic enough to come forward. They may feel minimized and downplay their experience because it doesn't mirror what they see in the media. ACT Alberta has had the privilege of serving hundreds of survivors, and while there may be some statistical overlap, their stories are their own. Human trafficking can and does happen to anyone. Coercion and manipulation are more common than restraints. Awareness-raising initiatives must be thoughtfully developed to better represent the diversity of survivors and of their experiences. My second point is that we must not dictate the opinions of survivors. Whether an organization believes in ending the demand for sex work, decriminalizing sex work, or remaining neutral in this debate, the priority should always be empowering the survivor. Stats Canada reports that almost half of Canadians who are in recovery from an active addiction will face social stigma in society, which creates significant barriers to accessing treatment and support services. Whether a survivor wants to pursue sobriety, exit or remain in the sex industry, or report their abuser, it is their decision alone, and one they shouldn't make with judgment. It's important to remember that the trauma a survivor has experienced may have started long before they were trafficked. In a study done by the Polaris Project, of 457 survivors surveyed, 96% of participants had experienced childhood abuse, whether psychological, sexual, or physical. Trauma-informed care helps us acknowledge someone's response to trauma and helps us change the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. We need to understand that survivors are equal partners in planning, developing, and monitoring care. Person-centered care means putting survivors at the center of decisions.
A point of order,
regarding them
one
as
moment.
experts.
Oui,
Hold.
désolée, madame. Oui, point d'ordre, madame la présidente. Il n'y a pas de traduction.
There seems to be some intermittency with the translation. Is it all right now?
Is it all right? Okay, let's try that. If you could go back to the last two sentences, I have stopped the time. And there's a problem? We're good? Okay. If you could go back to your last two sentences, if you don't mind, and then we'll start from there again. I had stopped the clock. Go ahead.
We need to understand that survivors are equal partners in planning, developing, and monitoring care to make sure that it meets their needs. Person-centered care means putting survivors at the center of decisions and regarding them as experts, working alongside professionals to get the best outcome. My third and final point is that labor trafficking is rampant. While I know that this study is focusing on sexual exploitation, it's very important to not overlook labor trafficking, a crime that thrives in otherness and often intersects with exploitation and sex trafficking. Traffickers typically target racialized and marginalized individuals who have precarious documentation and status in Canada. In 2022, 55% of ACT Alberta's clients experienced labor trafficking, and 100% of our labor trafficking cases involved clients of international origin. Based on our frontline experience and that of our partners, ACT Alberta believes that the national statistics on the prevalence of labor trafficking do not accurately depict the reality. Investing in research and direct supports for survivors of labor trafficking is critical, and equally important is addressing the systemic and cultural racism that minimizes the urgency of this issue. As you pursue this research initiative, I ask you to please consider the nuances of survivor-centered care and to continue to prioritize diversity of thought. Thank you for your time today and for all of your work to combat the trafficking of women, girls, and gender diverse people.
Thank you very much. I was just advised, I know that the Women's Legal Education Action Fund only has till 12:15. I'm going to ask Roselle if you could do your 5 minutes right now. And as we're starting our questioning, that's for the members to take that into consideration. So, Roselle, I'm going to give you the next 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Roselle Kim. I'm a senior staff lawyer at the Women's Legal Education Action Fund, also known as LEAF. I'm grateful to appear today from what is now known as Toronto, which is on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Wendat, as well as other Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Nations. Founded in 1985, LEAF is a national charitable organization that advocates for the substantive equality of all women, girls, trans, and non-binary people. We do this through litigation, law reform, and public legal education that is feminist and intersectional. As an organization with a mission to advance substantive gender equality, LEAF is committed to ending the exploitation of women, girls, and gender diverse people. Thank you for inviting LEAF to participate in this important study. I want to make 3 main points in my opening remarks today. First, effectively addressing exploitation of women, girls, and gender diverse people requires responses that aim to address systemic oppression, such as colonialism, racism, and transphobia, among others. A systemic approach to ending exploitation also requires acknowledging the negative impacts of state actors and actions. For example, Elaine Lamb from Butterfly noted how police can serve as a source of violence for Black, Indigenous, and racialized sex workers, and how encounters with the police can lead to negative consequences like detention and deportation for migrant sex workers. Taking this into account, measures to address exploitation must be grounded in anti-oppression and respect the agency and self-determination of everyone involved. As Crystal Snyder from Women at the Center remarked before this committee, saviorism and victimization language used by organizations and law enforcement doing anti-trafficking work can lead to trauma and re-victimization for victims coming forward. Second, trafficking and sex work are not synonymous and must not be conflated. Part of the work to stop conflating sex work with trafficking must include decriminalizing sex work. As you've heard from Sandra Wesley from Stella, the term trafficking has been used to refer to multiple concepts that range from physical, sexual, and labor abuses, as well as child sexual exploitation. This conflation has the effect of obscuring the sources of marginalization and vulnerabilities that I identified earlier. It also has resulted in harmful consequences for sex workers. Anti-trafficking measures that rely on policing and criminal sanctions do not address the sources of marginalization or inequality faced by people who are vulnerable to exploitation. Instead, they often make things worse, especially for sex workers who are targeted and pressured through these initiatives. You have heard from groups like the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform and Sex Workers of Winnipeg Action Coalition about how conflating sex work and trafficking has resulted in targeted harassment and surveillance of sex workers by law enforcement in anti-trafficking investigations. These harms are compounded by current criminal laws that criminalize sex work. Criminalizing and characterizing all sex work as exploitative make it difficult to identify actual instances of exploitation. It also excludes sex workers from protections against labor exploitation that are available to other workers through employment and labor laws. Finally, it is important to provide actual social and economic supports to people who are vulnerable to exploitation. These supports include income supports, social supports, affordable housing, and health supports that are accessible and barrier-free. These social and economic supports should be accompanied by changes to laws to remove vulnerabilities faced by migrant workers. For example, LEAF has called to repeal immigration regulations that prevent migrant sex workers from obtaining status or being allowed entry into Canada. In sum, ending exploitation requires a systemic approach grounded in anti-oppression, distinguishing trafficking from sex work, and providing concrete supports to eliminate sources of marginalization. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Fantastic, and thank you so much. I'm now going to pass the floor over to the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform, and Angela Wu, you've got the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Angela Wu, and I'm the Executive Director of SWAN Vancouver, a member group of the Alliance. I'm calling in today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. For the last 20 years, SWAN has supported newcomer, migrant, and immigrant women engaged in indoor sex work. We work to promote the health, rights, and safety of these women through frontline services and systemic advocacy. SWAN is also the member of the Global Alliance Against Traffic in Women, an alliance of more than 80 organizations from around the world working to end trafficking. As such, we are deeply familiar with issues relating to both sex work and trafficking. At SWAN, upholding sex worker rights and addressing trafficking are not mutually exclusive. As the committee has heard from other witnesses about the problematic conflation between trafficking and consensual sex work, I will not spend too much time on this point. All I will say is that sex work and trafficking are complex issues, and when they are presented as the same thing, the result is an oversimplification, which has led to well-intentioned but ineffective and even harmful initiatives, policies, and laws. Sex workers are bearing the brunt of these policies and laws, particularly sex workers from marginalized and equity-seeking groups. I'd like to take this time to address two recurring suggestions I have heard in this committee for improving Canada's human trafficking response. Many witnesses have called for, 1, increased training and public awareness campaigns about the realities of trafficking, and 2, more resources directed to law enforcement as a solution to the problem. While I agree that public education is important for addressing social issues, Right now, most anti-trafficking initiatives perpetuate misinformation that do a disservice to both trafficking victims and other marginalized groups. Human trafficking awareness trainings continue to use vague, overbroad, and frankly often racist red flags or indicators that trafficking is occurring. These red flags can be applied to many situations that are not human trafficking, which often leads to people seeing trafficking where it isn't and ultimately wasting resources. For example, a common red flag is that a trafficker will limit or restrict a perceived victim's ability to speak in public, or that someone will speak for them, when in reality, many of the women Swan supports may not speak English, and it's normal for newcomers to have family members or support workers translate for them. Furthermore, there is the unacknowledged role and complex interplay of gender, race, ethnicity, language, and culture in establishing these red flags. For example, when a number of non-white and especially Asian sex workers who speak accented English work together, this work situation can be perceived as a case of trafficking, whereas the same conclusion may not be drawn from a group of white Canadian-born sex workers. Although Swan works with women who are often perceived to be trafficked, it's important to note that we very rarely come across any cases with the hallmarks of trafficking, such as coerced work. Instead, we find that the women we support face a spectrum of exploitation and/or violence in their work, most often directly as a result of the stigma and criminalization that they face. To the second point, also embedded in most anti-trafficking initiatives is the idea that law enforcement is the solution to trafficking. However, repeatedly, women have told Swan that they fear the police more than predators. This fear means that some of the most marginalized and systemically vulnerable women do not report violence or exploitation. Our current laws and policies that are meant to address trafficking are self-contradictory. How can we expect law enforcement to protect the very same people that are criminalized by the laws that they enforce? Along with many other witnesses, I urge the Government of Canada to fully decriminalize sex work by repealing the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, or PACEPA, as well as the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulation provisions that prohibit migrants from engaging in sex work. The Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights has already made the recommendation to repeal the IRPR ban on sex work. We urge the members of this committee to reiterate this recommendation and to hold the Government of Canada accountable to following through on repealing these regulations, which actually put migrant women engaged in sex work in precarious and exploitative situations. I ask the committee to think critically about the issue of human trafficking and to recognize that while it is absolutely important to address, we do not have to jeopardize sex workers' lives to do so. It is not enough to just say that we understand the difference between sex work and trafficking if the resulting response continues to be anti-sex work at its core and put sex workers in harm's way. If Canada's anti-trafficking approach continues to be anti-sex work, the most marginalized people in the sex industry will continue to be at grave risk of violence and exploitation. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move over to the Yukon Status of Women Council, and I'm going to pass the floor over to Jessica Stone. Jessica, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak today. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Jessica Stone, and I'm the project manager of the Supporting Workers Autonomy Project Yukon at the Yukon Status of Women Council. We are located on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tonquachin Council. Our project provides direct services to people who trade sex in the Yukon, and we predominantly serve Indigenous women who inform and guide our project. I'm going to speak today to the harms that emerge when we use bad or non-existent data to inform our understanding, our frameworks, our systems, our policies, and laws. Many witnesses in briefs before this committee are testifying for the need for policymakers to differentiate between sex work and trafficking. When gender-based violence data is produced through a framework that conflates sex work and trafficking, all sex work is understood as and defined as violence. To be clear, we are not suggesting changes to the human trafficking laws per se, but we are asking to stop using the language of human trafficking in these studies to understand a broad range of violences. This conflation is not simply performative. By calling so many different kinds of violence human trafficking, you are obscuring the realities of those different kinds of violence. The human trafficking approach does not recognize the layered and complex violence that sex workers experience, most of which is not human trafficking. This causes harm in a multitude of ways. Firstly, bad data practices are amplified. There is a fundamental difference between the act of sex work and the act of violence against a sex worker. Secondly, by requiring sex workers to identify as victims of trafficking to receive support, the data gets skewed. In turn, the number of people who are reported as being trafficked gets inflated. This invisibilizes the realities of human trafficking and enables an increase in funding towards anti-trafficking initiatives and policing, which then perpetuates this cycle. This is a critical point for this committee to recognize in your recommendations. Human trafficking cannot be used as a framework for such a broad range of violent experiences. Sex workers have agency to do sex work, and sex workers also experience violence. Sex work laws need to be repealed in order for violence against sex workers to be reduced. This is a clear recommendation to this committee. Autonomy and agency are consistently ignored with respect to sex work, and this hypocritical framework deters people who sell sex from accessing safety, deters them from reporting occurrences of gender-based violence, and enables the continual hemorrhaging of taxpayer dollars into systems that are largely ineffective. Lastly, the anti-trafficking narratives used not only within this community, but in policies and practices at large, are rooted in racist, infantilizing language and ideologies. Without addressing such colonial and patriarchal origins, Indigenous, Black, migrant, and other racialized workers will continue to experience a disproportionate amount of harm from the enforcement of these policies. Indigenous communities have been very clear. Police training is not what is needed, but rather support to communities themselves. In conclusion, when all violence experienced by sex workers is mislabeled and understood as trafficking, we create a false narrative and we perpetuate harm. I'm going to break it down very simply here. There is a conflation between sex work and trafficking in the law and the application of a human trafficking framework. This conflation enables continued bad data collection practices, which in turn emerge into harmful practices and policies. The process that I'm describing here is self-reinforcing. It's a process that is essentially flawed by virtue of it being a closed system that fortifies itself. From a logical standpoint, it is invalid. From a methodological standpoint, it is ineffective. The very thing that's required to build systems, policies, and programs that have meaningful impact to reduce harm, that is accurate and reliable information about the lived experience of people, are negated by this conflation of sex work and trafficking. We see this parallel phenomenon in the North often. The lack of access to good or reliable data reinforces the continual building of bad or ineffective systems. If we do not have an accurate picture of the violence experienced by sex workers, we are going to continue to be unable to be effective in addressing it. Sex workers have repeatedly voiced the need to stop conflating sex work and trafficking. Sex workers are clear in reporting how violence is enacted upon them and who the violence is largely stemming from. If government and law enforcement are named as perpetrators of violence, there needs to be accountability from stakeholders and meaningful engagement with sex workers to create effective policy, law, and support that seek to reduce harm, not create it. Thank you, and I look forward to the opportunity to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll be starting with our first round of questions, 6 minutes each. I'm going to pass the floor over to Dominique Vienne. Dominique, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Karen. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being available to meet with us today to discuss the issue of trafficking of women and girls. This is a very challenging, very difficult subject, and based on what I'm hearing this morning, I'm having some difficulty figuring things out. We're hearing a lot of things and have for a while now within this committee. My first question, Madam Stone. Do you believe there can be, with consensual sex workers, can there be sort of an avenue towards trafficking? Does that exist? Because a number of you this morning are really making a distinction between sex work and trafficking of women and girls. Can there be, is it possible there can be a link between the two?
Thank you so much for your question. I would respond with, in all industries, including the sex work industry, there is the risk for exploitation and trafficking. And when we are talking about addressing trafficking, as many people today have spoken to, we need to address inequalities across all industries, and we need to have the same protection and regulations that are available to workers in all other industries available to those that work in the sex industry in order to reduce the vulnerability to exploitation and trafficking. So again, we need to look at Exploitation and trafficking can exist in all industries, so that includes the sex industry. However, we need to ensure that there's protections and regulations available to sex workers so that there's recourse available if exploitation begins to happen to them. Thank you.
Vous mentionniez,
Madam Stone, you were mentioning that there is a lack of data up north. I can confirm, I think the colleagues will be in agreement with me that yes, a number of people have come to speak to us to tell us that there is a lack of data everywhere throughout the country and that it's actually hard to put a finger on where the trafficking is happening, who's responsible for it, and to follow up with those victims. Thank you for your answer. Madam Price, if I understood you correctly, in your first point on sensationalism, you mentioned, I'm going to be using my own terms, it might not be exactly the terms you use, you referred to stigma as being more damaging than the offense, the actual trafficking itself. Is that a good summary of what you were getting at?
ou j'ai mal compris.
Perhaps I misunderstood this notion of sensationalism and how we're supposed to work within that concept.
Thank you for your question. So I find it confusing with the French and the English. My apologies. I definitely do not believe, nor does ACT Alberta believe, that the sensationalizing the crime is worse than the crime itself. It's strictly a concern that we have heard from survivors and clients who have communicated that they were unsure if they should even reach out because they felt that their experience was not horrific enough to warrant services or horrific enough to warrant the risk of deportation or other fears of entering the system. And so that's sort of what I meant by sensationalizing can worsen an already terrible crime.
Madam Price,
Thank you, Madam Price. Do you get the feeling that we have a good understanding of trafficking? Do you think it's clear what trafficking is?
Do you mean in this space today or within the Canadian culture?
non, au Canada, quand
In Canada, when we're talking about trafficking, I get the feeling that it's a situation many people talk about, but it's as though we're not always referring to the same things.
Wholeheartedly, and I believe, I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone else on the call, but I heard similar thoughts from them as well, that often the way that we define or perceive trafficking is sometimes wildly inaccurate compared to what we're seeing on the front lines, and certainly what sex workers who are doing consensual sex work have communicated as being vastly different from the clients we're working with who have experienced sexual exploitation. So I would agree, or would fairly confidently confirm, that rarely do we understand the true definition of trafficking and what it looks like.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. 1 minute, Madam Chair. Okay. Madam Wu, to get back to what we were saying, what the other witnesses have said today, you were saying that the victims are more concerned or more fearful of the police than of their predators. That's a significant comment, and it's not very reassuring.
Yes. Again, repeatedly, the women that we support at SWAN tell us that they actually fear the police more than they fear predators. And this is because due to the IRPR provisions that prohibit sex work, they are not able to access justice as freely as the rest of us can, because they live in fear of being arrested, detained, and deported if they are found to be engaging in sex work as temporary residents in Canada. That being said, I think this is actually quite a common feeling among sex workers themselves, because ultimately sex work is criminalized in Canada.
Perfect. I'm going to switch it over to Anita Vanden Beld. She has the next 6 minutes. Anita, you've got the floor for 6.
Thank you very much to all of you for being here. I have a question for the four of you, but before I do that, I want to pick up on something that Ms. Stone, that you said, because one of the things we've looked at in this study is about data and how difficult it is to get accurate data, which then can inform policy decisions and evidence. You put even a greater difficulty when you talk about the fact that by including so many types of violence as the label of human trafficking, we're not actually able to capture the data of what is really happening there. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on that and what we might be able to do about it.
Of course, thank you so much for your question. Yeah, definitely recognizing the data gaps, especially that exist in rural, remote northern regions such as the Yukon. I think most importantly, we need to invest in funding that is community driven. To do this, we need to provide core funding, long-term funding to nonprofit organizations. This can support developing their capacity, which in turn enables them to strengthen their policies, procedures, and their data collection practices. With this funding in place to develop capacity in data collection, storage, and analysis, especially for those in the north, nonprofit organizations will be able to generate more reliable data, as we know that trust that exists between nonprofits is often quite different than that exists from larger stakeholders who are typically doing data collection, such as governments or other formalized institutions. With this reliable data that can be generated, if we provide that capacity building to nonprofits, we'll then have a clearer picture of what's going on, and that can better inform services, policies, and practices that meet the needs and represent the needs of the community. So again, I would just reiterate that we need to provide funding to those institutions outside of those large institutional stakeholders so that data collected can be more accurately representative of communities, and then we can get a clearer picture of what our response needs to look like.
Thank you so much. A very good recommendation. So I have a question for the four of you, because maybe in the order that you spoke, because we've heard this from other witnesses too, and particularly today, of having a survivor-focused frame to look at this. And I've heard words like autonomy, agency, empowerment. And Ms. Price, you used the term human rights, talking about this as a human rights issue, as opposed to some of the things that we hear about victims and colonial frames that have been mentioned a few times. And particularly the word stigma. I think Ms. Price and Ms. Wu, you both talked about stigma, both in terms of how we view those that are facing exploitation, but also after they try to leave, and the stigma they might face in society. So I know that's a big question, but if I could ask each of you for 30 seconds to maybe comment more on what can we do to make sure that when we make our recommendations, we are looking at it through the survivors and not through the sort of stigmas and misperceptions that society may have. So I'll start with you, Ms. Price.
That's a big one for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I believe someone else used the word infantilizing, and I think that's a really accurate term for something that immediately disempowers someone who has agency and autonomy and is a whole person who has gone through something terrible. And I think that infantilizing survivors is adding to the stigma that it's just someone who had an experience that was terrible and they need supports, and that crime has to be addressed. But that the individual themselves are not a broken thing. They are a fully empowered person that can determine what they need and what their care plan should be with the supports of other professionals. And I believe that would support the reduction of stigma.
Ms. Kim, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I would just add that I think we need solutions that support and not punish the people coming forward. And I think having the survivor have agency means that providing them with options, providing them with a time to choose an option that works for them, and making sure that option doesn't actually lead them to any kind of additional punitive measures, like being stuck in a system where they might have to identify as something that they don't want to, like a victim, but that they are able to get the support that they need on their own terms.
Ms. Wu?
Yes. For me, I would add that this kind of goes back to the idea that human trafficking is used as a term to label so many different things. For the women we support, they face a spectrum of exploitation at which trafficking might be the most extreme. But when they are seeking help and they are being asked, are you a victim of trafficking? They're not able to actually answer that. And if they do, in our experience, and they answer honestly that they have chosen to do this work, but they are facing exploitation, they are often disregarded as no longer a victim, and often that leads to punitive measures against them. So I think stigma, it really does run through the language that we use and the framework that we use. The human trafficking framework really does isolate and eliminate certain people from accessing supports. So I agree with Kate, Ms. Price, about using a human rights approach is much more effective than a human trafficking framework.
Thanks very much.
for Ms. Stone?
We're past our 6 minutes
Sorry.
by a few seconds already. I'm going to pass it over to Adrienne LaRoche. Adrienne, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses who are here online. I will certainly have an opportunity to ask questions of you, but I'll start with you, Madam Price. Thank you for coming here in person. It's interesting to hear the witnesses today. There's a variety of points of view, but then also I would say there are things here that we haven't heard so much before at the committee. You referred in response to a question, you said it was short, 30 seconds was not enough, and the question was having to do with stigma or sensationalism. It's the first time I've heard so much about sensationalism in talking about human trafficking, and that in a way is causing this bias, a distortion in the statistics that we see, and what you're observing in the field in Alberta itself and elsewhere. I was wondering if perhaps you could tell us a little bit more in response to the question that you didn't have much time to answer.
I think that there is always going to be a divide between the statistical data that, as many folks have mentioned today, is unfortunately deeply flawed. There's going to be a gap between the statistical data and the lived experience and testimony of survivors. And I think that the stigma that folks are experiencing when they're trying to communicate that something has happened to them and that they've been exploited in different ways is that there's stigma culturally, but there's also stigma because there's literal punitive impacts of being highly at risk of deportation to just want to report their abuser or to enter the system in any way. And so when we talk about stigma, yes, there's a significant cultural stigma specifically around, I would say, sexual exploitation, consensual sex work, and sex trafficking that is very much ingrained in Canadian society. But there's also stigma with folks who have experienced labor trafficking, where people think, well, why couldn't they just leave? And that stigma, I think it's a question that I suspect many folks have brought up to this panel, is the why didn't they just leave question. And the fact that that question is still coming up suggests the widespread presence of stigma. Does that answer your question? Thank you very much.
Oui,
Yes, and I think we'll be able to get back to it because I still kind of have this view, I'd like to hear what you have to say. When we're talking about figures, some witnesses have said that victims or survivors are afraid to report things because they think it's dangerous to report to the police. They're worried about being blamed, humiliated. And what you're referring to, it's about 80% of cases of people who are trafficked who would not be reported to law enforcement. So some survivors have concerns about the police's capacity to pull them out of trafficking situations. Also because the fact that there is movement between areas, there's a fear about judgment, even if they're asking for safety or security, all of that lack of trust. In what way does that undermine our approach towards the victims of trafficking?
I want to start by saying that I know that law enforcement are coming from a good place and are trying to do the best job they can, and that it's a flawed system. I think that when we talk about creating anti-trafficking training, it has to also include nuanced training for law enforcement to understand the difference between consensual sex work and sex trafficking, and to understand a trauma-informed response. So how to talk to someone who has experienced extreme trauma and is currently in crisis. And without that level of training, I think most frontline agencies, it's certainly something we have experienced at ACT Alberta, is that we do our best to screen the law enforcement agents that we know will be engaging with survivors. And we're fortunate enough to have incredible partners that we trust. But we screen them because trauma-informed care isn't part of RCMP mandatory training, to my knowledge. And I think that that is just a cultural response that's an element of it. But the other side of it is the fact that the systems in place, the laws in place, the way that we handle people with precarious status in Canada is such that speaking to law enforcement may risk further trauma out of the gate, and they may literally be deported before they can even access any services. So there are multiple things there that I think that many folks on this panel, I think Ms. Stone brought up some great points about legalities and the legal structure. Sorry, that was Ms. Kim. That I think that we have to look at the cultural practices and the training, but also the larger legal structures that have immediate effect on folks seeking supports. I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, did I?
30 seconds left.
Okay.
Très bien, madame.
Very well, thank you. Yes, it does answer my question, but of course, 30 seconds left. I want to just raise the point of the issue of trust, that issue of confidence or trust, to know that there is the right legislation in place, that there's good consultation, that we're based on the right data, to have something scientific that is not based on stereotypes or other ideas. That's what I'm gathering, correctly?
I would encourage digging down on how we're defining trafficking culturally with training, but also in the law, and being very specific about how those terms are used, so that when it's that will help the data quality if we're able to better articulate what trafficking is and is not.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Leah, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for coming today. Very interesting. Madame Wu, I like that you were speaking about looking at things through a human rights framework. You spoke about repealing the IRPR. So I've been saying for a long time, when you make somebody illegal, you place them in danger. And one of the things that has been suggested is that, for example, if somebody is involved in a sex trafficking case, that the first thing that happens is that they get permanent residency, so that there's no fear of deportation. Although I'm a big proponent for status for all, because I think it's but that certainly has been one of the recommendations that has been given to the committee. But this is my question, actually. How does the keeping in place the IRPR infringe on the human rights of migrant sex workers and also others who might not be, may be sex trafficked?
Sure. So essentially, the IRPR prohibition on sex work makes it impossible for a migrant to Canada to choose freely what occupation they do. When they choose to work in the sex industry, they automatically are placed at risk of arrest and detention and deportation. And we have actually seen that happen several times with the women that we support. Often they come to the police's attention because they have decided that they want to report violence or exploitation. Unfortunately, almost every single time we've actually seen the woman end up getting deported. So I would just say that it's really a backwards regulation, because I believe the provision was added into the IRPR to address trafficking. It was a deliverable, I believe, of the National Action Plan from a few years ago, and somehow it was considered to be a way to address trafficking, but what we have seen is that, in fact, it actually pushes migrant sex workers deeper into the shadows, and it limits their access to justice and recourse.
So in saying that, going back to policing, I would argue that there is piles of systemic racism in policing, certainly as it relates to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Certainly, I know in the Indigenous community it's a very contentious relationship, certainly in the city of Winnipeg, where they just actually, another report came out calling out the racism of the Winnipeg City Police around the landfills. That was just this weekend again, how blatantly racist that was. In what ways do you think the federal government can support improvements in the reporting process, or is the system so flawed with systemic racism that we need to look at other avenues for reporting outside of the police to ensure the protection of sex workers and individuals being sex trafficked?
Yes, I think the big picture piece to this question is that we have laws that criminalize sex work currently. So how do people who are facing exploitation in the sex industry, which is what I understand this committee's main concern is, how do they access justice when the police are actually meant to enforce these laws? They don't really have access to justice. And I heard in a different hearing or different session that someone had said, we know that some police don't actually enforce the laws. They know when it's consensual sex work and they leave it alone. But the reality is that sex work is criminalized, and just because some police might say, oh, I'm not going to enforce this law, that doesn't really affect, or that doesn't really change how these women live their lives and operate. They still have to operate within the shadows as long as sex work is criminalized. So I think
just on that. So you called for decriminalization, and again, I think when you make somebody illegal or you criminalize them, you place them in jeopardy, their safety in jeopardy. Is decriminalization a critical piece to ensuring safety?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of options, in terms of human rights lens, I know I've asked you all the questions this round, I'll ask other people. Is guaranteed livable basic income, that's a bill that I'm pushing, because we talk about choice, but we don't really give people true choice. We don't have accessible affording rent geared to income. We don't have a guaranteed livable basic income. Do you think if we want to address this in a real way systemically, that one of the ways to do it is to put in place a guaranteed livable basic income?
Yes, absolutely. I think that is a big piece of it. Again, like you said, it comes down to choice and the options that we have as people living in society and living in capitalism. And I do believe that a universal basic income would make a big impact on people. However, I will say that that needs to be accompanied by decriminalization and destigmatization of working in the sex industry, because some people might still choose to do it.
Thanks very much. I'm just, that's the first end of the first round, but I'm just going to bring it up to everybody's attention. There is going to be a vote that is at 1:02, so the bells will be ringing in a couple seconds. So there is a vote at 1:02. We're going to have to decide, and so I'll put it in your minds, we're going to have to decide how we would like to continue. We can either continue and do this online, voting by mail or voting by app, as Nita was just showing me how we can do it, or we can do that. So it will be up to the committee, but there will be bells ringing very shortly. So we can either end to go for the votes, or we can continue on for a few more minutes and do that. I'm going to start the first round, though, and I'm going to pass it over to Michelle Ferreri at the beginning of the second round. Michelle Ferreri, you've got 5 minutes.
Sure. Or was it Anna? That's right. We went back and forth, so Anna, do you want to? Sure. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I know that Ms. Kim has gone, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I just need to know if you have the answer. So I'm going to start with Kate. Do you have any stats, female versus male sex workers? Yes or no?
I don't. I actually think I'm the least qualified person on
Okay.
this panel to answer that question. I would encourage one of the other folks who work more directly with the sex work community to respond.
Okay. And Ms. Wu, do you have any stats?
I don't have any hard stats on this. The people that we support at SWAN are primarily self-identified women.
Okay, thank you.
So we don't actually support males.
And Ms. Stone, same question? Ms. Stone? Hello?
Ms. Stone? Jessica?
Okay, did we lose her?
She's there. Can she?
Ms. Stone, can you hear us? Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question then. Ms. Price, I'm going to go back to you. Do you have any stats on the abuse between human traffickers and sex workers?
No.
Okay. And Ms. Wu, do you? Same question.
Sorry, can you clarify that question?
Sure. Do you have any stats on the number of individuals that are abused, whether they're human traffickers or sex workers?
I don't have any stats on that. I think, again, I'll reiterate, SWAN has been working with this population for over 20 years, and we very rarely come across someone who has been trafficked. But I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, it doesn't, but okay. Is Jessica Stone on the line now? Did we lose her? Okay, we've lost her. Okay.
She's turned it off.
Okay.
We're working with her. Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna go to my next questions. So we heard from Tamia Nagy. I'm not sure how many of you know who she is, but she was a victim of human trafficking, and she has helped many young people in guiding them out of that business. She's actually in Toronto tomorrow doing a presentation with CSBA. She also has a lot of high recommendations from the Peel Police on how she's worked with them to educate them. And one of the things that she shared, and I'm also reading her book, which is very dark, I'm not going to lie. One of the things that she shared with me was it starts with human trafficking, and then they get so enraged that they end up going to the sex trade because they have no other options, because they feel belittled, because they've been demoralized. These perpetrators and these abusers have demoralized them, that they just felt less of a woman. So my question to you is, as a woman, I think I have a lot to offer. I think in today's societies, women have the option of going to school, of getting an education, of doing better. I know that Tamia is a perfect example of getting out of this situation, going back to school, educating herself and educating other women. Do you, and I'll start with Ms. Price, do you agree that as women, we're better than just selling our bodies?
I believe that as women, we have the decision to make that decision for ourselves.
So you're okay with that?
I'm not okay or not okay with anything. My point and really the priority of me showing up today was to communicate that it's for each individual to decide for themselves how they want to live their lives and to have the agency to do so. And it's our job to try to address the systemic issues that are restricting their ability to do so.
30 seconds left.
Ms. Wu, what are your feedback on the opportunity that women have today?
I agree with Ms. Price 100%, that we need to keep in mind that we don't actually get to decide for each of these people. They can decide for themselves. And like Ms. Price said, everyone deserves to be safe, no matter what their occupation is.
Thanks very much. No bells ringing yet, so we're going to continue on this. Sonia's online. Sonia, yes, go
Madame la
ahead.
Présidente, 30 petites secondes.
Just 30 seconds. Just regarding procedure, even if the vote is at 1:03, our committee's supposed to be over at 1, so I'm trying to understand. I mean, it's so.
Continuing with our rounds. We'll deal with it very shortly. Go ahead, Sonia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would suggest we continue through the bells and then adjourn when there's 10 minutes left. So this is just my point. Thank you for the witnesses for appearing for the this meeting, human trafficking study. My first questions will be directed to Ms. Wu. Ms. Wu, what are some misconceptions about sex work and then you think are harmful and contribute to the problem of human trafficking?
I think the main piece is that sex work is inherently exploitative because it is not. There are people who exploit and there are people who are exploited. However, the act of sex work is not in itself exploitative. And I think that really is the underlying misconception in all of our laws and policies in Canada. Our sex work laws, PSEPA, in the preamble, it discusses, it's based on the premise that sex work is inherently exploitative. And when we consider sex work to be inherently exploitative, it's like what other witnesses have been saying, it infantilizes the people who are doing it, who have chosen to do this work, making it seem like they couldn't have possibly chosen this themselves, or that they need to be rescued.
Thank you. And my next question is to Ms. Price. Ms. Price, we know from Stats Canada that 9 out of 10 victims of police-reported human trafficking knew their accused trafficker. We also heard in the committee that traffickers often pose as romantic partners to recruit. Can you comment on whether you have seen this in Alberta, as well as any recommendation you might have for data collection?
We have absolutely seen this in Alberta. It's prevalent in the testimonial of survivors and clients that we have worked with. I certainly wouldn't say exclusively, but certainly a higher percentage than you might think. In regards to data collection, that's challenging because it requires the survivor to feel safe enough to provide that level of detail to someone who is collecting data. And that is an inherently flawed system to require a survivor to have to share highly painful testimonial in order for the data collection to be improved. So I'm not entirely sure what recommendation to make other than to further invest in community-based response services who are able to build the trust and have a nuanced understanding of the regional and cultural needs of the individuals in question, and that they may be able to help and assist with data collection. And to Ms. Stone's earlier point, without the ability to have multi-year funding within an organization who's collecting this data, and the inability to afford someone who is trained in a technical skill set such as proper data quality and collection, this will continue to be a challenge even if we consider prioritizing community-based responses to data needs.
Thank you, Ms. Price. We also heard about a free education program called First Defense, which goes over the sign to look for the detect human trafficking. Can you please give us an overview what they are and then how this program works?
Well, First Defense, we have a series of offerings. So what's not uncommon in Alberta, and I suspect Canada, is to have sort of a human trafficking 101 module, which tends to be sort of a 1-hour lunch and learn. That can be pros, cons, because there's so much context to provide that it is very hard to provide a nuanced understanding of trafficking and how it impacts different communities in that hour, but we try. And we do sort of an online webinar for that that's free and accessible for folks. And then we provide tailored training for industries. So what we do is we work with specific industries in, for example, transportation. So we work with the Edmonton International Airport to curate a multi-level training program that addresses how their team actually works. So for example, if they have shift work, we can't do an in-person training session for everyone. So we do online modules in addition to in-person training, in addition to filming it. And we try to train on identifying the indicators of trafficking, while even that sentence is a highly flawed one because indicators are so much more complicated than that. So how to identify signs of trafficking specifically in your industry, and how to safely respond. So does that mean reaching out to someone within your industry, within your job? Does it mean reaching out to the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking to seek a referral? Does it mean reaching out to a community victim services unit like that?
I'm going to interrupt. The bells are now ringing. That means we have a vote in half an hour, so I would need unanimous consent to carry on. I'm looking at all of those in favor of carrying on, okay? And then we'll finish at 1 o'clock today, which will give us time. Okay, fantastic. We are done that round. We're going into the 2.5 minutes. I make sure, 2.5 minutes. Adrienne LaRoche, you have the floor for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, thank you, Madam Price, for answering my first round of questions. For my second round, I might turn to the colleagues online or the witnesses online to discuss things with Russell Kim, Jessica Stone. One of the two of you can answer this question. So, among witnesses, we seem to see some unanimity that the federal government needs to work in cooperation with organizations out in the field, police services, the provinces, the territories, to collect complete data on trafficking and also to work further in a consultative or collaborative way. This is something that's been said. I know that there are plans that are being discussed. Certainly police officers in my area, the Sûreté du Québec, the Granby Police, they are communicating. Madam Stone, you work in the Yukon. How can we make sure that we work in a collaborative way? What effect would that have? Madam Stone first, and then Madam Russell Kim, please.
Thank you for your question, and apologies for what I missed there. Unfortunately, the internet in the Yukon is not great, especially at 9:30 in the morning. So apologies for being off for the last bit of the call. Thanks again for your question. Just hearing what you're saying, talking about all of the unique services, especially in a place like the Yukon, where there's a reduced amount of resources available, just given the population size that we have here, we really need to be effective in creating a wraparound support service for people who've experienced all types of gender-based violence and for people who do sex work. And in our stance, this does include the police at this time. However, we must be considerate in that we are talking about violence and we are being explicit when we name violence, and we are not conflating sex work and violence, which has been historically happening and caused this tension between sex workers and policing. So that said, I do believe, given the lack of resources we have in rural, remote, northern communities, that's not just the Yukon. However, that is where my experience lives. We need to have all hands on deck and create this wraparound support service to create these formal and informalized support networks so that people are able to have multiple options for access to safety.
You've got about 5 seconds. So if you want to say thanks, that's good.
Thanks.
Merci, mais je rappelle.
Thank you. Madam Russell Kim, think of your answer for this one because we may have another turn.
See, I love Adrienne. Her and I with the time, I love it. Anyway, Leah, we're going to go 2.5 minutes for you.
Thank you so much. My question is for Madame Kim. So you spoke about anti-oppression, and I'm wondering if you could share with the committee what an anti-oppression framework would look like for sex work and sex trafficking, as I scratch my forehead. Madame Kim?
She is not on here.
She's
Madame
gone.
Kim, no, Leaf has left.
Okay, maybe I'll move over to Right, I did it wrong. Maybe I'll move over to Madame Stone. You spoke about conflating human trafficking and sex work. That's something that I've brought up a lot in the committee, that conflating sex work, sex trafficking, and in fact child sexual exploitation places people in harm. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, definitely, and thank you for your question. When we are labeling all types of violence that happens to sex workers as trafficking, we don't have a clear image of what violence sex workers are actually experiencing And much like how we see this play out in a court setting, when we don't use the accurate language to describe violence, we often minimize and hide the impact of the violence, and therefore we're unable to address it as it happens. It needs to be clear. There needs to be a clear and shared definition of what is trafficking, which I don't think we have achieved in this space nor across the country. And we also need to lean into recognizing individuals as the experts of their own experience and allowing people to use their own terms to define what they've experienced so that we are able to be person-centered in our approach when responding to the violences and other experiences
So
people have.
centering individuals, you spoke about autonomy and agency. We've heard discussion about decriminalization. Is that part of that for you, decriminalization, in terms of providing individuals with the autonomy to make decisions about their own bodies and how? Madame Snow?
Absolutely. Decriminalization is the first step.
Perfect.
It's a very important step.
Thanks so much. We're now going to go into our next round. You know, Leanne and Adrian know how to really work that 2.5 minutes out, and I do like. So I'm now going to pass it over to Michelle Frary for 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thank you guys for all being here. Interesting testimony today. And I just have a quick question, if I can, to Ms. Price. You talked about sensationalizing human trafficking, and I'm curious on your thoughts of social media's role on minors, and if you think there should be implications of young people using social media or being exposed to social media that are highly vulnerable, or kids in general.
I do want to answer this question, but I want to provide the context that ACT Alberta only serves individuals 18 years and older, so I'm not necessarily the expert on that particular demographic. I will say that social media, the connection between online sexual exploitation and social media is very evident, and the risks there are absolutely there. However, I suspect that social media is not going anywhere, and so focusing on awareness raising, education, and training in schools to ensure that youth understand what it means and what it means to how far photos can go and how invisible people can be on the other side of that screen.
I guess I just ask your personal opinion, seeing what you see. Do you think that the age to use social media is too young?
I can't imagine a scenario in which we can control that. And so I'm not sure if the question would warrant further action. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you can absolutely control it if you have legislation in place and you change the age and parents are better educated. This is a post today from Adam Grant, and he said the earlier kids get smartphones, the worse their mental health as adults. New study, 27,000 plus people owning a smartphone younger predicts lower self-worth, motivation, and resilience, and more sadness, anxiety, and aggression, especially for girls. So just on the record, because it's something I think is a major contributor when we're having these conversations. I want to touch on something my colleague, Ms. Roberts, was trying to delve into, and I think she was doing a pretty good job, to be honest with you, but I think these are tough conversations, and I think we have to scratch below the surface to have an honest conversation about a lot of these things. And I guess my question to you, and I'll go to Ms. Price because you're in the room. Given a choice, if somebody doesn't believe they are worthy of something more, choosing to be a sex worker, I have no judgment one way or another. But do you think that is really what the first choice would be if given the opportunity for education or another job? Sometimes we have people who choose, minimum wage jobs because they have no other choice. Do you think sex work is a choice? And I know it ties into your sensationalization comment. But do you think given a room of women who were sex workers, they would say, yes, this was my first and only choice and my passion to fulfill in life?
I can answer the first part of that question. The last question I'm unable to answer because I'm not a sex worker in that room with other sex workers answering it. I would say that a wonderful way to answer that question would be to provide the level of access to education, affordable housing, safe choices, and reasonable income, living income, to be able to then see what happens and see what people's decisions are.
You don't know what your worth is if you don't know what your worth is, right? And that a lot of that is intersectionality of income, circumstance, poverty, which we know, right? So thanks for that thoughtful answer. I guess the last question I would ask you about is empowering survivors. You had touched on that. What do you think, if you could give one recommendation of the key thing we could do to empower survivors to break free, what do you think that would be?
To ensure that when they do reach out, they're listened to, and that how they define their experience is listened to as truth, not something to be interpreted through our own value systems and concerns and bias. So I think that by ensuring that the first point of contact for reaching out for services, for wanting to report an abuser, for just seeking safe housing, that point is thoughtfully designed to be trauma-informed and person-centered, and then when they reach that point, the systemic legislation and other forces surrounding it ensure that the individual isn't penalized for coming forward, such as deportation.
Ray, Mark, you have the floor. Oh, you're going to give it to Jenna? Who? I have Mark next on my list. You guys decide who you want to do it. Mark, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question would be first to Madam Wu, and also we talked a lot about data collection and or the lack of, or no definitions. But can you help us define that more on the some of that bad data collection and what we can do as a federal government to ensure that we do this in a better way, because right now government data is not really good. So you mentioned about community, and I think Ms. Stone also mentioned this. So can you start off, Ms. Wu?
Sure. I think it comes back to the discussion about definitions, because the way that human trafficking is currently defined is so overbroad and ambiguous that we are not able to actually tailor solutions to the actual problems. We cannot have a cookie cutter solution that will fit for all of these different issues that are often being caught in the net of human trafficking. So I don't know how. I think it really lies in the definition, because how can we find reliable statistics, or how can we collect reliable statistics without really knowing what it is that we're looking at? I don't know sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, Ms. Stone, you mentioned that on the definition aspect and the data, and then skewing our complete support and work. So can you enlighten us to see what recommendations you would have for us as a federal committee?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as so many before us today have said, really meaningfully including people who trade sex and people who are survivors of trafficking in your development of a unanimous definition of trafficking. Again, as Angela was saying, this overbroad definition that's including multiple types of violence outside of trafficking is, again, that's what's informing our current systems, and that's unreliable data. I think it's important to recognize that this has been finally recognized on a federal level. When we look at the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence federal government website, even they are now formally recognizing the lack of disaggregated or reliable data, especially in rural, remote northern communities. A quote verbatim from the government's website. The statistics reflect the national picture. However, instances of gender-based violence vary across Canada. There are challenges and gaps in collecting consistent and detailed data. A further challenge is the lack of data to support the use of an intersectional lens, which recognizes that people often experience multiple oppressions due to the combined effects of systemic discrimination. Mm-hmm. That's verbatim from the NAP website. I think it's definitely it's within reach for the government to dive further into their own recognition of this lack of data, mm-hmm. and to look at, again, including multiple community partners to ensure that the data moving forward is more reliably informed.
Thank you.
And again,
no, sorry,
go
I
ahead.
have limited time. So, Ms. Price, I just wanted to, talk about research and others, but I just want you to talk a bit about, the importance, of listening and to survivors, of listening to community organizations, versus, some government or agencies will project their own biases into this conversation and pass judgment. Can you kind of just talk a bit about how that is affecting the conversation and not listening to organizations and survivors?
I think that the conversation around data is actually a perfect example. So if you think about a survivor who has experienced trafficking and goes through the somewhat terrible process, I shouldn't say somewhat, terrible process of having to tell their story to 2, 5, 10 people before accessing the services they need. And by the time they're at a point with a representative from a government or frontline agency, for that data point to be collected, if the individual listening to them hears, let's say they haven't experienced trafficking, but they're a consensual sex worker who experienced exploitation, and the person who they're talking to hears sex trafficking, they check that box, and it gets added to the system. And so bias has a very profound effect on how we collect data, which then has a profound effect on where we invest funds into law enforcement and also frontline engagement. So training and data collection within frontline agencies who are community-based would be transformative in the ability to provide nuanced understanding of what an individual is saying happened to them.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. With the committee's permission, I'm looking at the time and we're down to about 3.5, 4 minutes. So I was just hoping that I can ask a question as the chair and just ask it of everybody and then we could call it a day. Everybody okay? Chair's asking a question. All right. Thanks, everybody. So I would really like to thank all. This has been a really good conversation. And I think specifically we do try to figure out, we understand that some individuals look at and are sex workers, but we also understand that many people have been exploited, and I really want to focus on the youth, focus on that 12-year-old young girl that it's been exploited, because those are the numbers we're hearing from the human trafficking. So I'm coming to you, and when we talk about definitions, can you provide a potential definition specifically looking at the age category of under the age of 18? Because I really do, I do not think sex work would be something for a child under the age of 17 and under. So what would sexual exploitation, these types of things, human trafficking in the form of somebody under the age 18, can you provide me a definition? I'm going to start with Ms. Price, then to Ms. Wu, and then to Ms. Stone. Ms. Price?
Anyone under the age of 18 who's engaging in sex work is considered exploitation.
Ms. Wu?
Yes, I believe that we already have a definition for this population is child sexual exploitation. And yeah, I think it stands distinct from human trafficking.
And Ms. Stone?
I would echo in full Ms. Wu's statements. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I just really wanted to do that because that's one of the biggest challenges that we're having right now is we do understand, and I hear you today, but especially when we're looking at youth, to me, it is absolutely exploitation, but we know of 12-year-olds being sold on the streets. We know of 12-year-olds doing random acts of sexual deeds because they have been exploited. So I think we really need to look at those vulnerable populations. So once again, I'm putting my chair's hat back on. I would really like to thank all of you for being here as our witnesses today. We're winding up this incredible study. So on Friday or on Thursday, we'll return. We will have the minister for 1 hour. She will be here to talk about main estimates. The second hour is going to be on this study. I see no objection. So today we'll suspend the meeting. Thank you very much. Adjourn. No, we're going to adjourn. Suspend.